One of the many talking points surrounding modern Yakuza concerns the subject of its tone. While the discussions tied to it commonly boil down to contrasting descriptors like grounded versus free-spirited, serious versus goofy, or even the more blunt old versus new, the true nature of the matter always left the series somewhere between the aforementioned extremes. Don't worry, we're not opening that particular can of worms now, especially with another Discourse powder keg being so close to emerging. But today's discussion is tangentially tied to the topic of tone, albeit on a smaller scale. Between RGG openly stating how Pirate Yakuza was an experimental title, rather than being indicative of the series' future, and the announcement of the upcoming Yakuza 3 Gaiden Dark Ties, the scales of the series' tone seem to be balancing out yet again, which should, in theory, be a welcome change, regardless of one's enjoyment of the modern RGG offerings. What I didn't expect was that the reveal of DT would lead to the frequent use of a specific term in both a very positive and very negative light in the community, that being the term edge or edgy. With the scenes of Mine handling sub-story disputes in a less happy-go-lucky way than Ichi or Amnesiac Majima, and the quote, "by unleashing the darkness he carries in his heart and the madness he hides behind his eyes," this led to a concern that this may be too much of a course correction, perhaps even communicating that the authors don't understand the appeal of Mine. I think this could make for a great discussion, and one that would feel in line for this channel, given my extensive coverage of Yoshitaka, and the fact I'm in the minority that genuinely enjoyed all tonal eras of Yakuza up to now. First things first though, let's cover the key word for this video, and apologies for the overuse of it throughout the script. A degree of edge is something that can be found in most media from the 2000s, the exploration of darker topics, pushing boundaries of what an art form can achieve, or simply attempts at shocking audiences, even if it's at the risk of becoming the subject of ridicule. The term means different things to different people, and speaking as someone with very fond memories of 2000s media, it's interesting how easy it is for a game to potentially cross the threshold of edge and fall into the territory of cheap experiences with no substance. The paradigm of how an edgy behavioral pattern or character can affect the player manifests itself as a clear tightrope act, but at the same time, characters with this moniker would commonly be some of the most recognizable and adored parts of the IPs that birthed them. Think of the trio of Sephiroth, Cloud, and Vincent from Final Fantasy VII. They have different degrees of edge to them, but if observed in the context of the story, their writing rarely comes off as a case of senseless try-hard behavior, and instead, like notable cases of emotional coping mechanisms from individuals dealing with immense mental turmoil. On the other side of the spectrum, you have individuals like Mr. Not Important Yakuza 4 Saejima lookalike from Hatred, who is a colossal failure in every conceivable way. Edge is the only thing that this character has going for them, making them a prime example of how fickle the use of edge can really be. Like with anything else, balance is key. Hence why not every character with a form of roughness to them is shrugged off as an edgelord immediately. This balance can also be seen in the cases of major Yakuza characters, whose use of edge usually led to extensive praise from those who experienced their antics, looking at the earliest iterations of Majima as a character or Ukiyo Tatsuya from Kurokyo. Now, let's take a look at this concept through the lens of Yoshitaka Mine, before expanding the discussion to the series at large. While many Yakuza villains have patterns to them people could call out as edgy, Mine has always been one of the most prominent examples of it, and not in a cheap way either. He's frequently seen as a calm and collected businessman, but is known to snap if pushed too far. He beats the hell out of a guy for breaking his art collection, and later orders his beheading, using the aftermath as a means of communicating his personal conviction to the lead of the story. He also stabs a subordinate for cracking jokes at Daigo's expense, leaving the rest of his clan mortified for the remainder of their journey. When observed out of context, this would come off as senseless or try-hard behavior, but when you consider his personal background, place in the story, and the fact that we are dealing with the criminal underworld, moments like these feel like an adequate shock to the system to keep the player in check. Having said that, given how Mine is by some written off as just a villainous entrepreneur who is evil for the hell of it, followed by the conflating of understanding a character's motives with the idea of excusing all their misdoings, any extra screen time he gets in the new release is bound to be misinterpreted by the same observers, hence labeling his examples of emotional outbursts and his moments of martyrdom as edgy, even if they're consistent with his pre-established writing. In Dark Ties, we see a younger version of the character just recently disillusioned with his life's work up to now, and someone who is yet to see the true nature of the criminal underworld, which would betray his hopes of genuine bonds spanning an entire organizational structure. Because of the position he finds himself in, and the betrayals that would follow, if the RGG online story is to be followed, emotional outbursts are to be expected, alongside the inability to control one's rage. And the easiest way to convey this in gameplay would be via a system like the Dark Awakening. Again, out of context, this comes off as prime edgelord territory, and even I would agree that the UI choice with the chained hearts is too on the nose. But apart from that, everything else surrounding the mechanic is an adequate fit for the version of Mine preceding the more calm and collected person he would be in Yakuza 3. The main moveset still has this class and agility to it, whereas DA is just a guy running rampant and causing ruin, in a way that's no less meaningful than the Mad Dog's moveset in Yakuza 0 would be, considering Majima's comparable emotional complexity in that title and beyond. From the contents of Dark Ties that can be confirmed at this point in time, these additions are consistent with the character that was introduced 17 years ago. Now, if the use of chain visuals in general still feels too fantasy-esque or unrealistic for an otherwise grounded setting, it should be noted that the ways in which the tonal consistency of a narrative is achieved won't always be reflected in gameplay. Sometimes, gameplay elements can come off as dissonant to the story, looking at the variety of heat actions in the franchise that solidify the misinterpreted quote of "Kiryu never kills anyone" into the meme that it is. Other times, you can have simple concepts be blown out of proportion for the sake of spectacle, looking at something like Saejima destroying the ground beneath him and exploding everyone away being a showcase of almost inhuman strength. Gameplay concepts like that are generally given more leeway, because it's expected that the player will make concessions for the sake of personal enjoyment, allowing over-the-top choices like the ones mentioned, or the act of protagonists exuding flames while fighting, to naturally coexist even within a crime drama franchise. Whether this approach appeals to a given player's personal preference from case to case is a different story. And given the diverse response to the implementation of Edge to what will be RGG's latest campaign, this gives us grounds to finally expand the question to a broader scope. Does Yakuza itself need more Edge, or rather, is this the element whose potential underuse led to less fanfare in the latest offerings? Well, let's look at the main lines that we got so far. Looking at them on the base level, the Kiryu saga is indeed treated as the darker one compared to the Ichiban saga, a matter that can be observed from two standpoints. The first would be that the darker tone is more so the result of the protagonists at the helm, rather than the sequence of events. And the second would be that the events themselves are the bigger part leading to a certain tonal prevalence. If the first suggestion is ultimately the determining factor, then no amount of edgy additions would make the Ichiban saga feel closer to the older games, and conversely, no amount of silliness would undo the perceived serious nature of the Kiryu saga. What if the reason why scenes like the Osaka Castle reveal in Yakuza 2, the rugby baby scene in Yakuza 6, or even the Yama Orochi fight in Yakuza 5 don't overshadow the rest of the campaigns is due to them being observed through the lens of stoic characters like Kiryu and Saejima? What if the addition of Kiryu in Infinite Wealth is what led to a decrease in the "new Yakuza is silly" type of commentary, at least as far as his half of the story is concerned? Personally, I don't think that's the determining factor between these two. Think back to how unhinged Ichiban became in Yakuza 7 after a particular shock reveal, or the soap on a rope scene's aftermath, or the sincere response to Kiryu's cancer reveal. This is all without mentioning things like the Barracuda crucifixion in Infinite, Arakawa's rampage, or the ritualistic executions. as there's a multitude of sobering or downright disturbing reveals present in both turn-based games, and I find it hard to recall any that would have lost their impact as a result of being presented through Ichiban's perspective specifically. So then, we're instead left with the second standpoint, i.e. the choice of events. Now, for one thing, the through line of the turn-based narratives does fit the Yakuza blueprint, due to involving familiar responsibilities and the navigating of an ever-changing world that is continuously torn between organized crime and political injustice. However, the way we travel from point A to B is admittedly quite different, with the biggest offenders of events unbefitting the standard formula being the likes of the dual excavator fight, the concept of mirror face, or the implementation of wildlife too impractical to fight, even though we already saw a variety of animal bosses in the past. It reaches significantly further into the make-believe side of things than the edgy side, assuming we treat these two terms as the polar opposites in this discussion. While this is ultimately all for the sake of conveying impossible odds being overcome by the lead and further escalating the current degree of spectacle in the franchise, an accomplishment of that sort can still be achieved in ways that don't risk breaking a player's immersion, which is why the premise of Edge could be of great use for the series moving forward. If throwing your protagonist into more frequent, unforgiving scenarios with darker premises ends up as the thing to separate the perceived silliness from something being seen as grounded, then the boldness present in Dark Ties will be the validation RGG needed to see what they should do with Like a Dragon 9. They did say that Kiwami 3 will supposedly hold signs to show where the future of the series was headed, and given how K3 and DT are inseparable due to their joint release, I wonder if the added scenes in K3 will show a similar emphasis on the edgier undertones of the series, letting them be closer to the forefront yet again. I obviously have a soft spot for darker narratives and characters, so if you ask me, adding in some more edge could do the series well. But maybe this is just another in line of RGG's many tonal experiments, ones that gave us stories as dark as The First Judgment, but also one as free-spirited as Dead Souls and Pirate Yakuza. Hell, for all we know, the reason for Dark Ties existing may be due to Pirate not being a universally adored title, despite being another Majima-headed campaign. If that is the case, then the community response to what follows will be of utmost importance. So I hope the discourse surrounding the games will be driven with this responsibility in mind. With all of these points laid out, let me know what you think about the quote-unquote edginess in Yakuza. Is it a subjective thing? Where is the line drawn between something having an edge versus going too far? And is there a truly optimal implementation of the concept to define an RGG experience? Either way, thank you for your contributions to what will hopefully be another level-headed discussion. So, until next time, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Cheers!